Hello everybody and welcome to the 29th Annual Great American Think-Off. My name is Betsy Broder. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. I am a rural rebounder, so that means I grew up in New York Mills. I left for college and I lived in Minneapolis for 10 years and then I moved back in 2011 and am really loving raising my family here in New York Mills. I have 4 kids and a husband and we live a couple blocks from the Cultural Center, so I think I said to one of the people on the way walking in, I have a pretty sweet commute. I get to walk 2 blocks, and I really love that about living in rural Minnesota. So the Cultural Center is a multidisciplinary art center that's been around for over 3 decades. We do a wide variety of arts programming. We offer events like the Great American Think-Off, the Fish House Festival, and the Kalevala Puppet Pageant, which we do each year. And we also have a visual arts gallery, a gift shop, we have a concert series, we offer classes and workshops, we bring artists into the schools, we go into organizations in the region, we bring art to the people of rural Minnesota, but we also celebrate the artists that live and work here, and we lift them up and try to celebrate that as part of what we're doing here in rural Minnesota. So in addition to being that rural hub for creativity, we also serve as a catalyst for economic and community development in a variety of ways. And one of our claims to fame is that President Obama, in making his appropriations request to Congress in 2011 for the new Our Town program through the National Endowment for the Arts, he first listed New York Mills as an example of a successful community who used small-town rural arts center to drive economic development. So we've been doing this. So we're pretty proud of that, but we don't talk about it a lot. So I think a recent board member said, you should really tell that story more. So that's why I shared it tonight, so thanks for that board member. We really work hard to be something for everyone in this rural area. So we have 32 years of cultivating the arts. We have 30 years in our historic Main Street building, and we now have 20 years of cultivating civil debate through the Great American Think-Off. So of those multidisciplinary events, we do a lot of things throughout the year. So last year we hosted over 180 events, and we really do enjoy them all, but the Think-Off is definitely one of our favorites. And it does take a lot of work, but let me tell you, we've got the best team doing it. So I want to say thanks to the staff of the Cultural Center, aka the Dream Team. I want to say thanks to the board of directors, many of whom are here tonight and volunteering to help this event take off, as well as the volunteers that show up, even not a board member or staff member, but we have a regular core of volunteers that continue to make these events happen. We also have a wonderful Think-Off committee that does a lot of the work in choosing the question and reading the essays and just getting us to the point we are today. And I want to especially thank our chair, Alice Martin, who's been leading that group for many years and keeps us in line and keeps things moving and headed in the right direction. Oh yes, let's say thank you for Alice. I also want to thank the Cub Scouts and their families for collecting ballots for us again this year. And the finalists and honorable mentions and all the entrants who continue to write essays, because those written words really keep us going and keep this contest moving forward. I want to thank all the press and media who help us tell our story and spread the word each year. We have a lot of partners in town that help make this happen, and that includes the Whistle Stop Bed and Breakfast, who hosts our finalists. Grassroots of Auditorium, Tom Eidover and his team generously loan us the beautiful flowers and plants that grace our stage, so we want to thank them for that. And the New York Mills School and NIFTA Billers assist with the tech and the sound and the lights, and they host us in this great space. So we spread out and sit in comfortable chairs and really just enjoy the debate in comfort. So big thanks to all those partners. There also are a number of business and individual sponsors that are noted in your program, so please take a look at that and support those local businesses as much as you can. And my last big thanks goes to all of you. It's wonderful to see the auditorium filled up. I want to thank you for supporting civil debate and for showing up, for buying a ticket, or maybe even becoming a member, connecting with old friends. I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, it's good to see you again. Maybe it's been a year, or maybe you'll make some new friends tonight too. And also thanks for keeping an open mind tonight, because that's what it's all about. Welcome to those tuning in online. So we are happy to reach a broader audience thanks to the benefits of technology. And we do appreciate all the interest in the Great American Think-Off, and of course we invite you to make a contribution online if you're able. A quick note of confession, so we did have a moment of not the greatest thinking, and maybe some of you noticed this, but in the program this year, we accidentally printed the ballots back to back, so I don't know if you noticed that. So the page that has rounds 1 and rounds 2, use those ballots, okay? And then on the back is actually where the final round ballots are, but we gave you an insert. So the extra piece of paper, that's what you're going to use for voting for the final round, okay? So we'll remind you of that then, because you actually tear that page out for rounds 1 and 2 for your voting. A little logistical note. Okay. So the Think-Off is a celebration of civil debate, which is more important now than ever in the divisive times in which we live. However, that said, I still believe we are all more alike than we are different. That if we're willing to keep our hearts, our minds, and our ears open, we can learn from each other, support each other, and move forward together, better for the interactions that we share. I even believe this is true whether you came here tonight believing that personal choice is more important, or maybe that social responsibility should be. In reading a sampling of this year's essays, it was heartening to learn that most people, regardless of their stance on the question, which was very equal, I will say, we had almost exactly equal submissions, so 48% social responsibility, 49% personal choice, and 2 said both. And so I think that really people believe that we should do what's right for the greater good. I really do believe that. And I think it's just an interpretation of whether that takes the form of personally choosing to do what's right or following rules that were created to ensure social responsibility. So I won't say anything more about that, and I'll let the debaters do it. But in short, please be kind, listen, make connections, be open to differences, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and whatever the outcome of tonight's debate, I'm confident that the conversations we all have following the debate will be civil, respectful, and maybe even a little hopeful. So thank you all again for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the debate. I invite you all to join us afterwards at the Cultural Center for a reception to celebrate the debaters and further our conversations. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Jennifer Nelson. Jennifer is no stranger to this neck of the woods. She grew up in Morris, Minnesota, and still spends most of her summers on the lakes of Auditorium County. You may recognize her as a 2-time Think-Off champion, claiming the title of America's Greatest Thinker in 2014 and 2019. She's the reason you know that love motivates more than fear, and that voting does indeed matter. Jennifer earned her Master of Public Policy from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School, and now resides in the Twin Cities, where she works as a research consultant for the Minnesota House of Representatives. Her life outside of politics is filled with dogs, books, tea, outdoor activities, and artistic endeavors. Please help me welcome Jennifer to the stage.
Thank you, and I know Betsy already said this much better than I could, but welcome. We are glad to have you here. I know in an age where the term civil debate may seem like a bit of an oxymoron, I hope that it will be a breath of fresh air tonight to see that we can disagree on big issues without being disagreeable. So, I would like to remind you that whether you do so based on personal choice or social responsibility to your neighbors around you, we do ask that you turn your cell phones onto silent at this time so we have no unexpected disruptions. But please feel free to share photos or information about your attendance here and your enjoyment on social media. So some of you may have been here before. Some of you may not have. I know people hate when I do this, especially in like rural West Central Minnesota. I understand. How many of you are here at the Think-Off for the first time? Oh wow! Welcome. So we'll have our first round with the 2 finalists who are arguing the side of personal choice. They will read their essays and take some questions. Afterwards, it will be up to the audience to use the ballots that Betsy pointed out to decide who had the strongest argument, and both of you would like to move on to the final round. After that round, we'll move on to the second round where the finalists argue social responsibility. Same field, we'll vote again of who you want to move on to the final. After that point, there will be an intermission so we can count the ballots. And the third round will be those winners who will come and debate the final question. Before another short intermission, the awards, and a wonderful reception that I hope many of you can join us for. So for round one, we will be taking up the side of personal choice. So if I can ask Ron Stewart and Dennis Knott to join us on stage. And please join me in welcoming them to So in this round, each debater will be asked 2 questions. They will get the person who initially asked the question will get 2 minutes to answer, and then the other contestant will get 1 minute to respond. But before we dive into questions, we will have them read their essays so you can hear their argument that got them to the stage in the first place. A coin toss at the reception last night determined that Ron would read first and take the first question. So go ahead and take us off, Ron.
Thank you. In late June of 2007, I landed in Kiev, Ukraine for the very first time. I was with a team from my church, planning to spend the next 2 weeks helping an English course at a college in Donetsk, spending time with children at a shelter, and building relationships with those others on the team had met on prior trips. Ultimately, though, the trip was life-changing because it was a trip on which I met my adopted-to-be daughter for the very first time. Galina was 5, a Ukrainian girl who'd been dealt a rough hand. She'd been born to a teenager not ready for a child, was given up at the hospital. From there, things deteriorated until she had moved to the shelter our church had started visiting. Friends from a former team had brought her story to us, and we decided to pursue her adoption. As expected, the transition to America and a new family had some ups and downs. Galina had to adjust to having a family, including sisters, stuff of her own, and a new school. There were also cultural changes to work through. From that trip, through multiple subsequent visits, and the adoption of Galina, I became acutely aware of some of those cultural differences. Ukraine, independent from the Soviet Union only since 1991, was evolving. One of many changes was learning how to exercise personal choice after decades of Soviet Union's focus on social responsibility. As I tried to understand the culture of our youngest daughter, it did not take long to realize that, practically speaking, personal choice is more important than social responsibility. There are 3 reasons that stick out as to why individual liberty must be central for even social-oriented cultures to thrive. The first is that a lack of liberty leads to a lack of initiative. Helping with English dialogue at a Ukrainian university, it became clear for these adults wasn't about pursuing dreams, but of maintaining the status quo. They had fewer reasons to drive forward as they were used to their gains being taken away. Second, liberty motivates innovation. I can't imagine Apple would have built their ecosystem of technology absent the liberty to create new things. Microsoft, Google, social media are all creatures of a system where innovation is prized. There's a noticeable overlap between the World Economic Forum's Innovation Index and World Population Review's Personal Liberty Index. In Ukraine, I noticed the new and exciting things originated from America and Western Europe. And the Ukrainian things were traditional. Products had been the same for decades or longer. Third, liberty protects integrity. Admittedly, this is imperfect perfection. Corruption, deceit, and injustice exist everywhere. Yet in Ukraine, corruption has been a significant problem. Bribery and other acts of favoritism were such that Ukraine was ranked 3rd from the bottom in terms of corruption through their first years of independence. Recent gains have resulted in moderate improvement, but Ukraine has a long way to go. On the other side, nations with more personal liberties and a history of them, tend to be much higher ranked on issues of integrity. Again, this is not to say that the U.S., for example, is free of integrity issues. When there is freedom to call out misbehavior, though, there's a much greater chance it can be identified and corrected. Initiative, innovation, and integrity seem to be byproducts of liberty and allow for thriving at a personal level. Yet I think that they also allow for social thriving that far surpasses what is available when there isn't a place for much personal choice. I observed this with Galena over time, as well as with my other daughters as they all reached maturity. As they gained freedom, they stretched more, took greater chances, and began accomplishing greater things. They also, and I've seen this with my younger friends and former students in Ukraine, have become better able to look out for others. Personal choice, in my experience, is more important because it not only allows the individual to strive, but because it allows for society as a whole to benefit from much, much more than would exist if such choices were not allowed.
Thank you, Ron. And now, Dennis, let's hear your essay.
Good evening. In 1972, I was stationed at an Army base near Augusta, Georgia. I was able to get away on weekends. In Macon, Georgia, I visited some of the antebellum mansions, extravagant beyond belief, all built with slave labor. What if I was a young man in that area in 1860 and I had abolitionist sympathies? I would have to know that the abolition of slavery would virtually destroy the economy of most of the South. So do you, if you're that kid walking down that street in Macon, choose what you personally believe is right, or do you choose what's good for the community in your state? I don't know that there is a person alive who would think that selfish or stupid inclinations of one individual should prevail over the common good. But what seems to be socially responsible at a certain time may not seem like that later. I went to college during the Vietnam War years. In the beginning, America's overwhelming sentiment supported the war. If we don't stop those monolithic, godless communists in Vietnam, they'll be on the shores of San Francisco next. Social responsibility, stop those godless communists. Personal choice, I don't believe in this war. 50-some thousand American dead soldiers later, nobody believes we should have been in Vietnam. My German ancestors lamented the fact that there was no wine in the United States. For the common good, they thought that they should bring wine to the United States. The Germans brought their dandelions over here to make dandelion wine. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Really, my ancestors. What might seem like social responsibility for one segment of the population may seem totally irresponsible for another segment. Consider the situation in Germany in the 30s when school children were told in their classes how the evil Jews were trying to destroy their nation. Most decided for the benefit of their country and their race that the Jews had to be eliminated. John Kennedy wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book in 1957, Profiles in Courage. He cited John Quincy Adams, Daniel Webster, and Samuel Houston, among others, as having the courage to oppose what the vast majority of their associates considered to be socially responsible. History is filled with examples of individuals who differed from what was considered the common good. Copernicus, everyone wanted the earth to be the center of the universe. What fool would disagree? The Hebrews said to Pontius Pilate, "This Jesus fellow has got to go." Just listen to the crowd out there. Everyone here agrees it's for the best. Rosa Parks said, "I don't care where everyone thinks I should sit. In this bus, I'm not moving." There are a lot of examples. It would be ideal if every individual's personal choice would align with society's benefit. Can anyone ever agree on what is socially responsible? The Republicans and the Democrats disagree on everything. The French and the Germans have disagreed for 1,000 years. Carnivores and vegans disagree. I needn't say anything about Vikings and Packer fans. To answer properly the question posed by the Great American Think-Off this year, I would like everyone to assume that the people we talk about have some intelligence and some sense of right and wrong. I know that's assuming a lot, probably too much. Nobody would ever assume that every person's choice should trump society's benefit. No one approves of axe murderers, people who cheat on their taxes, or people who litter. Still, social responsibility does not always align with what is morally right. I remember from that same Army base taking a trip to Atlanta in 1972. The major highway was closed for road repair. I took the back roads, went through small towns, lined with houses where some of the windows were simply wax paper and roofs rusted sheet metal. People, mostly black, were in rocking chairs in front of their house. The sidewalks were wooden. In Atlanta, I saw the Axe Handle Restaurant, a restaurant honoring Lester Maddox, a former Georgia governor who had once stood outside the door of a restaurant with an axe to stop integration. That night in Atlanta, the restaurant was filled with customers who thought that Maddox had acted for the common good, for the benefit of society. He hadn't. The question we consider this year has no easy answer. I'd ask you to consider my point of view. Thank you.
All right, so the first question goes to Ron. Ron, you referenced a global innovation index and a global personal liberty index. You claim that countries with the least personal freedom, such as early Ukraine, have less initiative and innovation. Can you explain then why cultures with a strong belief in social responsibility, such as Japan, are able to boast so many technological marvels and a workaholic work ethic?
Yeah, actually, this is where I get to geek out a little bit. I'm a cybersecurity data guy, so numbers are my thing. Actually, looking at the indices, one of the other things that I noticed that was very interesting on this question specifically, Japan actually ranks pretty highly. They're one of the top 20 on personal liberty. So where we assume maybe perhaps that they're very social oriented, which they are also very highly ranked with personal liberty. And when I looked across the countries that ranked highly on personal liberty or low on personal liberty, the difference across many different categories, not just innovation, integrity, and others, healthcare, wealth, violence, crime, equality, the freer countries universally had, with very few exceptions, much higher spots in the rankings. So liberty associates very well for this. And in countries like Japan, I think you see a pretty good mix of both social orientation, but you also have a very strong personal liberty. So it's not, in that case, a social responsibility exceeding personal liberty so much as them working together. And personal liberty, in a lot of these cases, associates very clearly with great societal benefits across numerous categories.
Thank you. Dennis, you have 1 minute to respond.
Okay. I think Ron made a lot of good points. However, what I would disagree with is I think personal liberty and freedom are not necessarily personal choice. Personal liberty means you're unencumbered. Well, you can be unencumbered and spend all your time in a hammock in your backyard. Whereas personal choice, you have to pick a direction in your life. And I think that some of the concepts that Ron talked about are economic concepts. And I would think that there's a lot of people who disagree that the business world in spite of all the innovations, that they have the best interest of the American people at heart. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this next question goes to you, Dennis. Almost all of your examples rely on the judgment that some personal choices turn out to be ahead of their time, and that a minority view, like Copernicus, can eventually become widely shared. Doesn't the fact that minority viewpoints you champion turn out to be the socially responsible views prove that in the long run, the greatest good for society is what ultimately will prevail?
Yes. But I think it's which came first, the chicken or the egg. Personal choice is something that leads to social responsibility. You know, Copernicus, within about 30 years making that statement, everybody believed that the Earth did revolve around the sun. It took a while before slavery was eliminated in this country. It certainly took a while before the country was integrated, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that the way society perceives, or a group of people perceive what is responsible, is not the same as what a personal choice, which a person with morals would come up with. And it does take courage, I think, sometimes to come up against what people consider the common good.
Thank you. 1 minute per response to the same question.
I think he's right. Not just to the question of being ahead of your time, but I also think there's a danger if we allow social responsibility to be defined by those who are not morally correct. But in a personal liberty situation, which I think allows for personal choice, if you don't have personal liberty, you can't make personal choices. It's harder to call out that wrong-headed or immoral activity in action. And that's where I think personal choice feeds into better social responsibility, in part by reducing the risk of immoral actions. On top of the idea that sometimes people have the choice, they can be more forward-thinking, and they can get to that next step ahead of even society, which allows then for more people to follow along.
Thank you. All right, Ron, this next question is yours. You argue that it's a matter of context and conscience to determine if rules should be respected or overturned. Is conscience a creation of environment, aka context, or an absolute?
Can you repeat the question?
We never said this would be easy. You argue that it is a matter of context and conscience to determine if rules should be respected or overturned. Is conscience a creation of environment, aka context, or an absolute?
That's a question that I can answer from my own personal religious philosophy. Is conscience is something that God gives to each of us. In the more general context of around the world, conscience is going to be somewhat fluid by culture. We know that every culture has different values, different priorities, and different relationships, and the ways that they interact with each other on a moral level. But we've also seen that across the globe, the higher level, more important types of moral thinking tends to be more consistently in agreement than in disagreement. There aren't a lot of societies out there that think, hey, let's just go kill people for fun. There seems to be some underlying level of conscience in our observation that surpasses, geography and cultural boundaries.
Thank you. Dennis?
Well, I would say that it tends to be a matter of culture more than a matter of absolutes, because a civilization has evolved so much that what was once considered to be morally right is now considered to be morally terrible. For instance, religion. People used to be convinced that you could kill somebody that had a different religion because they were sinners. You had religion, politics, you had who would rule in tribal authorities. Your other tribe was your enemy. You go, for example, in Scotland, my wife and I took a tour there, and we learned about all the clan warfare. It wasn't even somebody fighting against a different race. It was fighting against a different family. So I think that it is it does evolve over time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, this is the final question of the first round, and it goes to you, Dennis. You argue that social responsibility doesn't always align with what is morally right. Please explain this concept further by giving us some examples and explain how one decides what is best in such cases.
Well, it doesn't always align with what is morally right. Social responsibility means what people think is best for society, what generally people think. And it's the people in power, normally, who set what is social responsibility. Let's face it, people are selfish. So what people consider to be common good is what they consider to be common good for themselves. And somebody needs, on occasion, to get up and simply say, this is wrong, and things need to change. And you can use examples all the way from the formation of our country when not everybody was in the colonies or inside of the American Revolution. There were a lot of Tories in here who considered being loyal to the King of England was a moral necessity. But we had a revolution. And also slavery is another real example. The woman's right to vote is an example where you make progress a little at a time. And it's usually because of a nudge from somebody whose personal choice crosses what is considered socially acceptable.
Thank you. Ron, 1 minute per response.
I think that evolution of morality argues against the absolution, or against the idea that it's purely contextual. If it's evolving towards something, if we could determine whether something is right or wrong, then there's a standard that we're comparing it to. So if it to be culturally evolutionary all the time, what's to say we couldn't, given the, I would say, wrong environment, go back to thoughts that before society had rejected as immoral. So I think there's an absolutist sense to morality that I think underlines all of this. And to say that the cultural context is the sole describer allows for us to slip back into things that we've decided already are immoral. I think it's more clear that people will sometimes understand what is moral and choose to go against it, then that morality would be something completely fluid.
Thank you. That's the end of the questions of the first round. Each debater will now get 1 minute to give their closing statement and try to win your votes to move on to the final. I hear some of you ripping already, but keep an open mind for these last statements before you make your decision. And Ron, you get to start here.
I think it's clear Dennis and I agree on many things, being on the same stage on the first round, including the risk of having social responsibility defined by the wrong people or by the wrong set of moral standards. But liberty brings much more to the table. Advancing capabilities, awareness, benefits to society, benefits to the health and well-being of our culture. So in addition to just being a way of getting around the risk of bad moral judgment, which is certainly true, there is more to personal choice, and personal liberty brings to the table for the benefit of the culture and the society, not just the individual.
Thank you. Dennis?
I would ask you to consider the fact that most people that we consider, say, heroes for some reason, were people that crossed the social boundaries of society benefit. For example, you take, even if you're not a Catholic, you take martyrs. Why did they die? Because they crossed what society wanted them to be. Some of the heroes, say in Roman times where the gladiators, everybody came to see them killed. Obviously, socially irresponsible. But most of the heroes, I think, are people who stood up against what was considered socially acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give a hand to both of our Now you've heard them make their case, the decision is up to you who you think should carry this position into the final round. So as Becky showed you, tear out your round one contestant you'd like to move on, and we'll be collecting those votes. In addition, I'll remind you that you may submit any questions you would propose for the final round to be considered to be asked. So they'll be collecting those at this time. Thank you so much. Let's give another hand to the first round. And while you are doing that, I will invite Matt Anderson and Blaine Breda to come on up and tell us why they believe that everything you just heard is wrong. And they're going to tell us why social responsibility is the thing that should be more important. All right, I hope you all made up your mind on the first round. You are going around and collecting those. While you're waiting to turn those in this round, we did the same thing, a coin toss at the reception last night determined that Matt will be going first this time. He will read his essay about why social responsibility should be more important. So I don't know if you want the second round.
Which should be more important, personal choice or social responsibility? I choose social responsibility, even when it hurts. I don't like paying taxes. Ouch. Double ouch in California where I live. I don't like wearing a mask. They're uncomfortable. I don't like shoveling snow off my sidewalk at 6 a.m. in the morning. Something as a recent Chicagoan turned Californian, I don't have to do as much. Yet I do it out of a responsibility to the greater community. I do it because a functional society is not just about me. A mindset that prioritizes the me over the we is a society where helping others beyond your tribe is seen as too much of a risk. I bike everywhere, even in Chicago winter. One day when I was biking to the train station, I slipped off my bike over a patch of ice and crashed to the sidewalk. I lay dazed on the sidewalk. Dozens of people walked by as if I didn't exist. I brushed myself off, physically fine, but disturbed that no one seemed to care. It's everyone for themselves, I thought out here, concerned about what that meant for the larger world. Personal liberty is core to America's founding values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a noble cause to strive for, and one that many of us hold dear. Yet America has changed. In 1790, 90% of Americans lived on farms. Now it is 2%. My grandma grew up on a farm outside St. Joseph, Minnesota, during the Great Depression. Her family was very self-sufficient and isolated. She never strayed more than 20 miles from her home until she was a teenager. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, filled with bear stands, a metro area of 10 million people. I was constantly tapping into shared resources, from parks to roads, schools, and lakes. When you have millions of people packed into dense urban centers, each person's responsibility to the community is much greater. A mindset that prioritizes me over the we creates a society where shared spaces are abused by a few at a cost to all. This dynamic plays out every time I go shopping at Costco. Shopping carts litter the parking lot. These disbanded carts block spots, causing hazards and sometimes even cart shortages, all because a few folks didn't want to walk a few more steps to return them. Parking lots are a low-stakes situation, but the same need for this dynamic plays out in higher-stakes situations, from healthcare to gun control laws, to the detriment of society. Also, even seeming personal choices impact society. Yes, you could drive a gas guzzler and chain smoke and argue that these are your personal rights. They are. But if you think your choices only impact you, they don't. The tax may be long-term, such as pollution, or hidden, such as secondhand smoke, and increased healthcare costs for everyone, but it's there. And just because you can, doesn't mean you should. Peter Marshall, the chaplain of the US Senate in the 1940s, captured it perfectly when he said, "May we think of freedom not as the right to do as we please, but the opportunity to do what is right." In today's connected world, we have a greater obligation to do what is right than ever before. Now, the biggest threat to a better world is not selfish people making choices in the name of liberty, but misinformation. If we can't agree on a shared reality, we can't agree on what is socially responsible. Right is relative and often drawn along hyperpartisan lines. The COVID pandemic really highlighted this divide. Some of my cousins truly believe COVID vaccines are dangerous. They aren't here tonight. For them, resisting is a socially responsible choice. To some, social distancing saved lives. To others, it unnecessarily disrupted businesses and education, harming lives. As citizens, the ultimate responsibility is not just making socially responsible decisions, but educating ourselves so our socially responsible decisions are truly net positive. So, in conclusion, social responsibility is more important than ever, not just in life's small moments, but for confronting humanity's greatest challenges such as climate change, inequality, and global pandemics. These are collective action problems. The solutions require people around the world coming together and working together. I choose social responsibility because the future of our communities, our country, and our planet require working together towards the greater good, even when it hurts.
Thank you.
Good evening. Individual rights are a foundation of our Constitution and something I value. Having traveled to many countries, I've come to appreciate the freedoms we have in America, especially the freedom of personal choice. But as Eleanor Roosevelt said, quote, "With freedom comes responsibility," end quote. And one of our greatest responsibilities is to take care of each other. Our social responsibilities are more important than our right to make personal choices. As the preamble to our Constitution states, we the people, not I the individual. For most of my childhood, I was partially raised by my grandparents on my mother's side, and I was influenced by their values. They were part of what is known as the World War II generation, or simply the greatest generation. Tom Brokaw wrote that these men and women fought not for fame or recognition, but because it was, quote, the right thing to do. It has been said this generation made sacrifices for the common good, not seen in any generation since. And it wasn't just the sacrifices of wartime. It was their belief that we were more important than me. Fast forward to today, when social media is influencing our values. I'm noticing a disturbing trend, even on business networking sites like LinkedIn. Rather than sharing information that could be helpful to others, many people use social media for self-promotion. They sell rather than serve. They crave attention rather than seek connection. They're all about me and not we. I see a more positive trend in the business world, where profit has historically been the only priority. Today, there's more interest in companies doing the right thing. The Harvard Business School says this means a business should be committed to measuring not just profits, but also its social and environmental impact. This is what's known as the triple bottom line of profit, people, and the planet. Of course, not all companies care about these values, but according to the Forbes Human Resources Council, altruism is a must-have for companies of the future. Please don't think I'm pointing a finger at others while standing on a pedestal of selflessness. I can be as self-centered as they come, which is why I understand the real struggle between social responsibility and personal choice. I often get angry when I see others not doing the right thing, when they appear to be looking out only for themselves. But the truth is that I'm angry because I see a bit of myself in those choices, and I don't like what I see. It's similar to when our children do things we don't like, And yet, like a mirror, they're only reflecting back our example. I think most of us are a combination of me and we. So how do we reconcile this tension within ourselves to do the right thing when we also want to be free to do whatever we want? For me, the side I choose may depend on the magnitude of the choice. The closest thing to a world war that most of us have faced is the COVID-19 pandemic. Rather than come together like we did after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, some people have chosen sides based on whether they value our personal freedoms over our responsibilities to each other. The medical experts advised that getting vaccinated and wearing masks would help us get back to a normal life more quickly. And I'm sure my grandparents would have been perplexed by some people's unwillingness to do something as simple as wearing a mask to keep others safe. They'd probably wonder what would happen if people were asked to make the kind of sacrifices that they made. I recognize that some people feel that mask and vaccine mandates jeopardize our freedoms, and that we have a patriotic duty to stand up for what? We have a patriotic duty to stand up for our right to make personal choices. But remember that with freedom comes responsibility. During the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, said, "Freedom and duty always go hand in hand. And if the free do not accept the duty of social responsibility, they will not long remain free." Those are eloquent words, and our words matter. Think about the words we tell our children. Be kind, clean up, don't hit, hold hands, play fair, stick together. These lessons children learn at home and in school often reflect our highest ideals and wishes for them. Even our Pledge of Allegiance begins with I, but ends with all. That's a lesson worth learning. Thank you.
All right, we'll start off questions with Matt. You posit that rural life has fewer social responsibilities than densely packed urban areas sharing resources such as healthcare, land, and roads. Now that you've witnessed 2 cars meeting at the 4-way stop in New York Mills, are you sure it's so different? Side note, I don't know if he's here, but I would like to give a shout out to the pedestrian I had this very standoff with in New York Mills last night, where we found ourselves at odds of who was going to go through the intersection. So welcome if you're here. It was delightful. More seriously, aren't we all sharing water, land, tax money, and other scarce resources among many conflicting needs? Are you implying it is easier to have personal freedom when nobody is watching, or are you saying that something else is at play?
Great question. I've loved my time in New York Mills, and I think people here have a lot of social responsibilities, and I've seen it firsthand where I was walking this morning in the street, and Ron came and picked me up and gave me a ride. That would not have happened in Chicago. So, to the question, I would say that when more people are packed together, there's even greater responsibility because the amount of people you interact with on a day-to-day. So, for example, if you lit a fire in your backyard in downtown Mountain View, California, where I live, like all my neighbors would be calling and the cops would be here. But if you live on a bunch of acres of property and you have a farm, like that's in your right to do something like that. But I would agree that everyone on this planet does have a responsibility to tackle these big issues such as climate change, which only can be solved if we all work together, not just the people in New York Mills, not just the people in Chicago, not just Americans, but the entire world has to come together to tackle this.
Thank you. Same question, Blaine.
Well, I agree with Matt's premise that sometimes there's a different philosophy between urban and rural America due to just the sheer number of people that have to share space and resources. I would add that sometimes in more rural places, people are given more freedoms to, do what they want, so to speak. There aren't as many rules to follow. And that's probably one of the reasons why people choose to live in a place like New York Mills. Now this morning I went for a run, and I only got a few blocks away from the Whistle Stop B&B, and a dog came after me. Now I was in the middle of the street, I wasn't even on the sidewalk, but this dog saw me, and started barking, and I saw it, and I thought, okay, this dog is gonna come out of its yard, it's gonna cross the sidewalk, and it's actually gonna come into the street, trying to bite me in the leg. And I'm doing my best, I'm sure it was hysterical for anybody that saw this, I'm doing my best to intimidate the dog, yet continue running while shouting, could someone please call off your dog? Now, maybe it's common for people to let their dogs not be on a leash, but I would say the socially responsible thing to do is to consider how that impacts other people.
Thank you. A lot of local color to this round of questions. All right, next question starts with you, Blaine. You say the magnitude of the choice is how you justify your choice. Given that it would serve the public interest best, why shouldn't there be a mandatory vaccination for all? Or mandatory measures to minimize our carbon footprint to stop climate change? Or are we avoiding such difficult issues because U.S. politics still privileges me over we?
Well, part of the problem is that our politics has entered every aspect of our lives. I mean, we can't even enjoy a sporting event without it somehow becoming political. But beyond that, I think what we've learned through the COVID pandemic is that we don't like being told what to do. It's not even necessarily that we mind the thing that we're being told, it's just the fact that we're being told what to do. As many of you may know, the hybrid workplace or working from home may become the future of work. And in all the studies that I've seen, people are willing to go back to an office for maybe 2 or 3 days out of a week, but they want some flexibility in what days those might be, or even how many days it might be. But if a company mandates you must come back to the office 3 days and it must be these specific days, they don't like it. So if they're given freedom to make that choice, then they're more apt to do it. But if it's mandated, then they're not. So I would suggest that the real issue here is that we just don't like being told what to do. So while I support more people being vaccinated and more people looking out for each other, I don't think it's something that we can force people to do. It's not something we can mandate.
Thank you. Matt, 1 minute for the same question.
Yeah, I think with COVID, especially when there's a new disease like this, we have to be willing that we don't know everything right away. And then we have to take a calculated, evidence-based approach. That's super, super hard in today's era, where maybe a lot of people live in echo chambers that are only feeding them some sort of information, so people get polarized and they can't work together. But if in a democracy, we get to decide the policy, so if people could come together and have a civil discussion of what is best for society, and then the politician put a mandate in place, I think that's democracy working as intended. But if this is a top-down thing of, oh, let's punish the other side by forcing them to take a vaccine we don't want, I don't think that's a healthy democracy, and that's not how our country should work.
Thank you. Next question to Matt, and before I read this question, I'm just going to give a disclaimer in case my bosses at the Minnesota House of Representatives are listening to this, that this is not my opinion. Not to be flippant, but if the solutions to the world's most pressing problems require, your word, people to prioritize the we rather than me, then isn't it time to just forget democracy and embrace pro-social totalitarian rule?
No thanks. I would actually make the argument that a society where people just prioritize personal choice could result in anarchy. But I think in the democracy that we live in, when you're in positions of power, such as an elected office, the responsibility you have to society is even greater, because we elect people to represent us, not the lobbyists, not rich people. So I would argue that in our current system, that when you're in a position of power, whether that's elective office, or let's say you're Jeffrey Bezos, or some really, really rich person in Minneapolis, like, you need to use that to make better change in the world.
Thank you. Blaine, 1 minute for the same question.
One of the things that fascinates me every year about the Think Off question is I'd really rather respond, it's both, or it depends. And a question like this is pointing to an extreme. And my belief, and I'm sure many of you share it, is that this is really about balance. We're not suggesting, I'm sure, either Matt or I, or frankly, anybody that's a finalist this year, that social responsibility being more important than personal choice means, again, that it's being forced on everyone. There's a balance between helping people to take that initiative and feel the desire to want to be socially responsible and mandating that they be socially responsible.
Thank you. All right, we've reached our final question of round 2. We'll start with you, Blaine. Some people put social responsibility ahead of their most basic personal needs, such as people who give all of their belongings to charity or set themselves on fire to draw attention to an important issue. When does social responsibility cross the line, and what do we do when it does?
Well, I can tell you that I'm too selfish to do those things myself. And that's why I specifically called that out in the essay. It's a struggle for me, honestly, to have the ideals of social responsibility, to know that there's things that I could or should be doing for the benefit of all, and yet internally I'm still struggling with the me, right, and trying to look out for myself. So it's hard for me to even imagine some of these more extreme things that people have done for the greater good. And again, my theme is balance. So I don't think that we need to be calling attention to a cause at the risk of our personal health and safety. But I think most of us can do more. There's probably some angels in the audience, the kind of people that I would just marvel at what you do for others and how much you consider other people over your own well-being, even at the expense of yourself. But I think most people are probably more in the middle, where we want to look out for our fellow human beings, but we're also trying to take care of ourselves. And so we have to make that individual choice as to how does that manifest? How do we actually do things for the common good without sacrificing too much personally where it's a detriment to ourselves?
Thank you. Matt, your response?
I would say there's a lot of people in this society who are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, whether that's serving your country and fighting in a war, putting your life at risk, or being a firefighter, running into a building, a police officer, responding to an active shooter. There's a lot of people who care so much about society that they are willing to risk everything. And I would say in my own life, I like this phrase, hurt so good, that humans are uniquely designed that when we give back to your community, like maybe it's temporary discomfort, your time, your money, but at the end you actually feel good. And I think that's a great way humans are designed.
Thank you. All right, Matt, we'll start with you. We have 1 minute for closing statements for you to make the case to the audience why you should go on and represent this position in the final round.
So the Constitution is about protecting rights, not telling you what to do. There's no law saying you have to be a good person. That's up to you. America's not only great because of the rights we have, it's what we do with these rights that truly makes this place special. We're special because of the people like the folks that run the New York Mills Cultural Center, who've created such art and vibrancy in a small town, or people who open up their loving homes to children who may not have one, or those folks who during COVID didn't buy all the toilet paper at Walmart. Think about when we're at our best. It's when we're serving something bigger than ourselves, and that is why social responsibility is more important.
Thank you. Blaine?
There's a difference between having a right and doing the right thing. We have the right to vote in elections, but it's not right to attack our Capitol because we don't like the outcome of the election. We even have the right to question if the election results are valid, but it's not right to take the law into our own hands. In some states, teenagers have the right to buy an AR-style rifle and hundreds of rounds of ammunition with no training and no questions asked. But it's not right to use that weapon to kill innocent people. We have the right to use social media platforms to share information, but it's not right to use them to knowingly spread misinformation and conspiracy theories. We have the right to make personal choices, but if we don't consider our social responsibilities, we could make the wrong choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do it again. All right, you've already had practice with this on the first round. Once again, take and tear out your choice. The actual will be coming around and collecting those of who you think made the strongest argument and should
Hello, everybody. We're getting ready to start the final round. Before we do that, I just wanted to share a couple things. We have a lot of new attendees at the Think Off this year, so I thought it'd be a good chance to share a little bit about the process of how the essays are selected, and to remind everybody that next year's the 30th annual Great American Think Off, and so we're always trying to continue to learn and grow and get better with this contest. And so we have a great crowd here tonight that I want to invite you to leave a suggestion for us if you have ideas. We want to continue to reach more people and invite new people, not only as audience members, but also as essay entrants. And that really is a priority for us. We work hard to get the word out about the question each year and try to encourage as many people to write essays as possible. It's free to enter, there's not a fee, and so that's one way that we try to avoid that barrier. And we also just really try to reach people in different corners of the world. So the other thing that's really important is one of the values of the Think Off is really to judge the essays based on their content and not the people who are writing them. And so the thing that we do is we redact all of the personal information when we receive essays. And so the committee who reads and judges the essays judges just the words, the content of the essay, without any of that personal information. The goal, of course, is to avoid any implicit bias that might come from knowing more about that person. And so we have talked about how do we adapt with the times, how do we maybe encourage more people to enter. One of the things we've talked about is accepting video or audio entries, which I think is a cool idea, but then can we do that without that implicit bias thing? So just really open to ideas. I feel like I have a room full of smart thinkers out there, and so I want to really encourage you to leave us suggestions. There's some space in the program tonight, and we have survey boxes on your way out. There's a couple of survey boxes, or you can put them in the basket with your ballot as well. And I just want to really encourage and ask everybody to please give us your ideas. Help us come up with ways that we can reach a broader audience, both for the essay submissions and for the attendees at the event. So thank you in advance for considering that. And just think too about, thank you. Yeah, input is good, isn't it? I think we say in the program we love feedback, and we really do. We keep trying to make this event better and better. So it takes a lot of different people and a lot of different perspectives, and that's really a value that we hold close in all of the Cultural Center events. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that. Also, just a reminder, at the end of the event, we'll be heading over to the Cultural Center, so everybody can join us there. But we do still have an important part left here, don't we? Yeah, okay. So I'm actually going to get out of the way and let Jennifer announce the winners.
There's apparently something you want to know. All right, well, I will tell you who moves on to the end, but before I do, I will warn you in advance that by the time we get to the end of this question, you have to make a final vote. It might be like that four-way stop where you're wondering who to wave through first. So don't say I didn't warn you that you may have some hard choices ahead. All right, from our first round, we've counted all the votes, and the individual who was selected to take up the mantle of defending personal choice as more important is Dennis. And the contestant moving on to battle for the supremacy of social responsibility of being more important is Blaine. So I would invite both of you to come on stage. We'll do a coin toss to decide the order, and we'll get moving into this final round. And let's give another hand just for everyone and for our where you all get to learn whether I can do a coin toss in front of a crowd of people without totally dropping. Jury's out. I appreciate that encouragement. I can show you. There's a hat there. Right there. Once again, it's going to be the same format. They will have 2 answers to respond to the question, and then the other contestant will get a 1-minute rebuttal. All right. Let me see, I just gotta remember who's what here, hang on. All right, so starting with our representative from Personal Choice, Dennis. Do we achieve the greatest outcomes for all through personal choice? If so, are the outcomes longer lasting?
I would say no. I don't think they are longer lasting. I said you'll make a change, but then social responsibility will mean something different. If personal choice causes minds to be changed, then what people consider social responsibility will change. So it's a question of how they morph into something else, I think. It's not an absolute.
Thank you. Same question to you, Wayne.
Could you repeat the question?
Do we achieve the greatest outcomes for all through personal choice? If so, are the outcomes longer lasting?
I would say we definitely don't achieve the greatest outcomes for all with personal choice. Personal choice is often about personal achievement, personal goal attainment, not looking out for the common good. And as has been stated already up here tonight, when you look at a lot of the achievements and advancements and improvements and things that have happened in our society, it's collaborative. Some person may have an individual idea, but then it takes a group of people to really hash it out and figure out how to implement it. So, I would believe that the greatest benefits are going to come from social responsibility.
Thank you. All right, next question, we'll start with you, Wayne. The individual, not society, has a mind and does the thinking that produces knowledge that is shared with others who must use their minds to grasp it. These abilities are basic to forming a fair, just, and prosperous society. Does that not endorse the idea that personal choice is actually more important than social responsibility? Why or why not?
I think Matt kind of spoke a little bit of this earlier. If we aren't agreeing on what is truth or what are facts, what is the correct information, then our personal choice is flawed. And so thinking requires that you get information from a wide variety of sources and that you think critically. This is something that unfortunately in our social media world, and I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I understand its benefits. It can be an amazing tool for bringing people together and sharing information. But it also can become kind of a mental crutch where whatever a person happens to see on social media or sees that a friend forwarded to them, rather than thinking critically or trying to verify the information, they just take it as fact. And I don't have the statistic on the top of my head, but there's a pretty startling number that says that a lot of the things that are just simply forwarded and shared on social media have never actually been read by the person who sent it on. So you have people who get information and think, oh, I think someone would like to see that, but they've never actually looked at it themselves and then they just pass it on. And so information is just getting shared out there without critical thinking. So the personal choice in that matter, I think, would be flawed.
Thank you. Dennis, you have 1 minute for a rebuttal.
I like what you said about social media, but social media is not necessarily just personal choice. You find that people tend to align themselves with one group or another. For instance, you look at some of the news channels. It used to be we had news channels. You got a half hour of news in the evening, got a little news in the morning. Now we have it 24 hours a day. We have liberal news channels. We got conservative news channels. We got more news channels. And everything reinforces the idea that you're right, that your beliefs are right, because that's the only beliefs you are listening to. So I would think in that case to think independently is much better than to follow along with the social media.
Thank you. Next question to you, Dennis. Are there responsibilities that come with the freedom to make personal choices? Why or why not?
Well, of course there are responsibilities. If anybody makes a selfish choice, I would think in the beginning I said that I'm assuming that people are intelligent and they wish to do good things. And if they don't, their personal choice is garbage, there's no doubt about it. But I think you have to assume that there are some basis, some behavioral norms to use in making judgments.
Thank you. Blaine, your rebuttal?
Well, it's not so much a rebuttal. I actually agree with Dennis that there is a huge responsibility when you make personal choices. What I'm not sure of is if we actually think that through. I'm not sure that we're mentally disciplined enough to do that work, to think ahead and understand that that personal choice actually has a ripple effect, you know, like tossing a stone on a pond and watching the ripples go further and further out. All those personal choices have an impact way beyond us. Many times we don't even know what those impacts are. So yes, there's a deep responsibility when you engage in personal choice, but it's an effort to actually think that through before making the choice. It's easier to just be expedient and make the choice quickly.
Thank you. So how do we cope, this one's back to you, Blaine, sorry. How do we cope with the fact that individual choices don't always benefit society? This is the question we have all been struggling with the last few years. What do we do when people make choices that hurt the greater good? Do we try to influence them, coerce them, or ignore them and hope they don't do too much harm? How do we cope with those whose personal choice threatens to tear the social fabric of democracy?
Well, that sounds a lot like the time and place we find ourselves in, doesn't it? I've struggled with this. I tend to be a very kind of fact-based, somewhat, thinking, call it intellectual type of person, and that doesn't necessarily sway anybody's opinion. If somebody has a deep feeling about something and you just share a lot of facts with them that might be contrary to that feeling, I don't know that that actually would change their mind because they have a deep-rooted feeling about something that they believe to be correct. So I actually think that the cure for a lot of these ills that we are struggling with as a society right now is to be better listeners, to sincerely want to understand another person's point of view. And that is not an easy thing to do because normally when we're listening to people, we're actually already thinking of our response before they've finished. To quiet your mind and that inner critic and just hear a person out doesn't mean that they're going to change your view or that you're going to, suddenly believe that what they say is correct, especially if it's not factually correct. But just giving people the common decency to hear them out and try to understand and have some empathy for where they're coming from. In other words, conversation. And especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic, we've been more isolated. We've been spending a lot more time staring at screens and communicating virtually. And I don't think that's helped because it's in-person communication, eyeball to eyeball, where we can really understand each other.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to agree with Blaine on that. It's social media has, I think, as well as it does in some areas, has really corrupted society in others. Now, I liked it when I could go on YouTube and find out how to repair my dishwasher. It was very nice. But by the same token, I go on Facebook and I've had to mostly unfriend people because I found out what they think. And I like you better. Before I knew what you think, and I hate to say it, but many of those are my enemies.
Thank you. Well, we certainly hope that no one in the audience likes any of us less now that you're hearing a lot of what we think tonight. Next question, starting with you here, Dennis. Over the last several years, a hyper-individualism has arisen and grown. Also, I promise I did not know his response to the question before, but we have these in this order. The general sentiment of people who think this way, let me start, sorry. Over the last several years, a hyper-individualism has arisen and grown. The general sentiment of people who think this way is that they have no responsibility except themselves. It can be argued that the growth of this mindset threatens the very bedrock of our society. Doesn't this argument undermine your position? Why or why not?
Well, I don't think so. I think when you say hyper-individualism, what you'll often find is what Blaine said, there'll be people who will forward an email. Now, you know that that email has been forwarded to them, and whoever forwarded it to them forwarded to another of their 400 close personal friends, and the man that would forward it to me forwarded it to 400. He's not doing any individual thinking. He's just passing on this stuff. And this sort of thing will go around the world.
Thank you. Blaine?
Could you repeat that question? There was a lot to it.
Over the last several years, a hyper-individualism has arisen and grown. The general sentiment of people who think this way is that they have no responsibility except to themselves. It can be argued that the growth of this mindset threatens the very bedrock of our society. Doesn't this argument undermine Dennis's, this was proposed over here, so it's undermining Dennis's position as how we asked it about personal choice was more important and why or why not?
Okay, well, if I understand the question correctly, I think the fact that we have the challenge socially, that's what creates this sense of looking out for yourself and that there's not enough. And I just need to get what I can for myself, and I'm not going to look out for other people. It just exacerbates the problem. You know, it feeds on itself. I don't think that inherently as human beings, we actually believe that. Maybe some people, you know, depending on their life experiences or how they might have been raised. But I think inherently as human beings, we actually care for each other. We actually consider other people. But when we're in an environment like we're in now, that's very stressful, we tend to have kind of that fear response and start just looking out for ourselves.
Thank you. This one goes your way, Blaine. Certain Native American tribes have a philosophy of planning for the next 7 generations. What do we want our society to be like for future generations? How will social responsibility best sustain our society over time?
I'm familiar with that philosophy of looking not only forward 7 generations, but also looking backward at what we've learned from the previous 7 generations. I don't even know, honestly, if we're capable of that type of thinking. We're very kind of short-term minded, and obviously I'm not implying any particular person in my statements when I say we. I'm just saying as a society, I think we're short-term oriented, and our leaders, who we look to as examples, whether it be on a local level with, you know, school boards or village trustees or, you know, whatever those positions might be called, all the way up through the halls of Congress, we see as an example short-term thinking. Let's just kick the can down the road, we'll deal with that problem later. And so we're kind of losing that ability to think long-term as well as learning from history. You know, I've often heard as a novice student of history that the mistakes that have been made historically will continue to be made until we've learned those lessons. And if we don't look back and learn from previous generations and previous experiences, we're prone to make the same mistakes again. And then we're surprised, you know, like, oh, how did that happen? It's just kind of the way we're geared. Everything is very fast-paced in our society today, very short-term, immediate gratification. And again, that's just contributing to some of these challenges that we face culturally.
Thank you. Dennis, 1 minute per rebuttal.
I don't think we can prepare for 7 generations ahead. I have problems preparing for, say, next Sunday. So, and the reason I say we can't prepare for it is we have no idea what the world's going to be like 7 generations away. Give you an example. My mother was delivered by a doctor who came out to her house in a horse and buggy. Okay, 50 years later, a man landed on the moon. That's how much things have changed, and I see no reason to believe that future changes won't be just as drastic.
Thank you. So for our final question of the debate tonight, we actually had each of our finalists prepare a question that they would want to ask the other side. So if you guys are prepared to, you can read those. If you need to defer to me, that's okay too. But we'll start off with Blaine's question for you, Dennis.
Okay.
Go ahead, Blaine.
Okay. Dennis, Sometimes our nation feels like it's pulling apart, especially when we're not coming together for the common good. How can you justify personal choice over social responsibilities when, according to many historians, we're more polarized personally and politically than we have been since the Civil War?
We are polarized, but everybody who takes an opposite position always believes that they're the socially responsible ones. Republicans believe they're socially responsible. They believe Democrats are not. Democrats believe they are socially responsible, and Republicans are not. The same goes for religion. Protestants believe they are socially responsible. Catholics believe they are. And that's not including the Judaism or Islam. But everybody believes the position that they are part of is a socially responsible position.
Thank you. 1 minute for rebuttal, if you'd like.
Rebut my own question? No, I understand what you mean. So as I thought about this question, and especially the Civil War, I was thinking of perhaps Abraham Lincoln's greatest speech, the Gettysburg Address, at a time when he was trying to make sure that the death of soldiers did not go, for naught. And of course, as he finished that speech, many of you are familiar with the famous phrase that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And it just reminded me that when you look at any of the great orators and their most famous speeches, the things that stand out is that they're talking about us. They're talking about a collective. They're not talking about just personal choice. There may be personal choices involved, but the end result of those personal choices is that there's a greater good, there's a social responsibility. That's what stirs us. That's what makes us rise out of our chairs and applaud and want to do something. My time's up.
Thank you. All right, Dennis, if you would like to read your question for Blaine's side.
Today, the American public is divided both politically and culturally in ways that permeate every aspect of American society. We can all agree that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but that's about all we agree on. So, who determines on any subject what the socially responsible position is?
Yeah, and I know that was a foundation of your essay, and I really appreciated that idea that it's nice to be socially responsible, but who gets to determine what that is? I think obviously there's a personal choice involved in even determining what is socially responsible. We do live in this time when we're seeking information that confirms what we already believe to be true. And so what I'm suggesting is a way to get through that is to, again, seek out varying points of view, but ultimately, you have the power of personal choice, and you have to consider all those different points of view and come to your own conclusion. One of the things that Dennis said earlier that I take a little issue with is the idea of unfriending people when you learned more about them than you wanted to know. Or the cancel culture that you often hear people talk about, where somebody's done something that you think is, inappropriate, and that's it. I don't want anything more to ever do with that person. That goes completely against what I suggested earlier, that the path forward is listening and trying to understand opposing points of view. And again, it's not our fault that we don't do this, because I don't think we're wired to. I think we're wired to form clans and tribes and to seek things that confirm what we already believe. That's our nature. But we're kind of seeing where that leads us.
Thank you. Dennis, you have 1 minute for rebuttal.
Okay, rebuttal. Blaine has a point. However, when you look at it, there are sometimes positions other people take which are completely indefensible, which trying to understand it is virtually impossible for a person who has any moral conviction. There's a lot of people who defended the attack on the Capitol, for example. You can't reason with them, and even listening to them, I don't understand how it really could make any difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the questions. Each of our finalists will now get 2 minutes to make their closing case for why their position is the one that prevails here. And we'll start with you, Dennis.
Okay. No question that has ever been asked at the Great American Think-Off has had a cut and dried answer. The result of these debates are never as simple as a coin toss. Head wins, tail loses. It is more like an election. You lose 47 to 53%, it's called a resounding defeat. If it's 42 to 58%, it's a landslide. It may be a landslide. Still, that doesn't mean that 42% of the people on the losing side had no conviction of any worth. So it is with the debate tonight. Social responsibility is important. I wish there was more of it in the world. Still, in the debate tonight, I picked the side of personal choice. In picking that position, I assume that a person who decides to go up against what many people would refer to as social responsibility has two qualities. They are a reasonable human being and a person who intends to do good. If not, all bets are off, and I would have given a concession speech before the debate ever began. If a person is reasonable and tries to do what is right, he should prevail over social responsibility for one simple reason. Rarely can one say with any certainty what social responsibility is. History is full of examples. Women shouldn't vote. In the year 1900, 95% of all adult males would have told you that giving women the right to vote would be socially irresponsible. The next thing you know, they might want the right to drive an automobile. After Pearl Harbor, American citizens of Japanese ancestry were sent to the internment camps. Everyone thought it was a responsible thing to do. Years later, the United States of America admitted that what it did was wrong and apologized. Centuries past, social responsibility meant many different things. In 1431, Joan of Arc was captured. Is that Bell?
Isabel,
Oh, okay, let me skip to my last paragraph.
I'll allow it.
When a man or woman makes a personal choice, we can hope that a person is responsible, intelligent, and has the best interests of the human race in his or her heart. The real irony is this: when such a person takes that position, it may very well be the socially responsible thing to do.
Thank you. Closing statement, Gwen?
Thank you. Let me first of all just say it's been a privilege to share the stage with these three gentlemen, and I don't envy the choice that you all have to make. Just be responsible about it, please. I'll be brief. When I think of thriving marriages, I've been married over 35 years. I think it was 36 this year. If my wife's watching, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's 36. Thriving communities, thriving countries. Having had the benefit of traveling internationally, I've visited many places. And when I think of thriving communities of people, the word trust comes to mind. We can trust each other when we put our responsibilities to each other over our personal choices. America, however, has a trust problem. We can't trust people to wear masks during a pandemic. We can't trust that our children will be safe at school. Many Americans no longer trust scientists, the government, or the media. Some of us have lost trust in religion, capitalism, and most importantly, each other. It's not an exaggeration to say that seeing the world as us and them is the basis for most of the suffering and violence in the world. Over 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy called on Americans to, quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Let's answer the call by prioritizing our social responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, you should know what to do by now. You have an insert in there, this time instead of an individual. You're voting on the final answer to the question. The beauty of the think-off is that we're not the only ones up here doing the thinking. We hope we've given you a lot of things to think about tonight. And now it's time for you to cast your vote on where you landed after all that thinking you have done. So do you think that personal choice was the stronger argument, or that social responsibility was the stronger argument? We'll be coming around to collect your votes again with a short intermission, and then we will find out who won. I'd like to remind you also that after this is all over, there is a reception down at the Cultural Center. There's always good food, a lot of good conversation. You can ask your own questions to the finalists. So please join us there if you can, and we'll be back to let you know which side prevails. Thank you so much. The votes have been counted, and can I ask all 4 finalists to join us back on the stage to present? And that is some well-deserved praise, both for the arguments and the great job they did public speaking, and for making philosophy enjoyable for the rest of us. So, all right, well, first of all, let's recognize our finalists that did not move on to the final round. So for our bronze positions, those would go to Ron Stewart and Matt Anderson. All right, I'm sure this is the moment that you guys have been waiting for to see who came ahead with the votes. So, Wayne and Dennis, if you would like to step forward, and we will announce the winner here. Everyone did a fantastic job and gave us a lot to think about, so I just want to, again, thank you all for being here. But at the end of the night, when the votes were counted, the side that prevailed was Blaine Rada. Thank you once again, everyone, for being here. To our finalists, please join us if you can at the reception over at the Cultural Center. And if you have an idea for a question that should be debated on this stage, feel free to submit them. We're always taking ideas like that. And thanks once again for being here. One last round of applause for our
There's a protocol for this, but I just thought I would share a few thoughts. First of all, the YouTube streaming is working because my wife, who couldn't be here tonight, has been watching with our cat Griffin, although she did say Griffin was sleeping. She clarified 36 years. I just wanted to make that statement. So, 36 years. Thank you all very much.